There is a room inside you that you have never fully entered, not a metaphor you read once and forget. An actual room, a place beneath your thoughts, beneath your habits, beneath the version of you that wakes up every morning and performs the same motions on autopilot. It is the room where every experience you have ever had was quietly filed away. Every rejection, every triumph, every whispered doubt, every moment someone believed in you, and every moment someone didn't. This room has a name. We call it the subconscious. And here is the truth almost no one tells you. That room has never been cleaned out, not once. It has only been added to, year after year, decision after decision, until it became so cluttered that you started mistaking the mess for who you are. Today, we are going to walk into that room together, not to be afraid of what's in there, not to dig up pain for the sake of pain, but to do something braver and far more useful, to sort through it, piece by piece, and decide what stays and what finally gets released. Because here is something extraordinary about the human mind that most people never learn. It can be recycled. The old material doesn't have to be dragged forward forever. It can be broken down, reshaped, and rebuilt into something new. Your history is not your sentence. It is your raw material. Think about what recycling actually means. It doesn't mean destruction. It doesn't mean pretending the old material never existed. It means taking something that has served its purpose in one form and transforming it into something useful for the next stage of life. That old fear that used to protect a frightened child can be melted down and reforged into discernment. That old anger that used to feel like a weapon can be reshaped into boundaries. Nothing in you needs to be thrown away in shame. It only needs to be transformed with intention. This is the quiet, powerful work of becoming who you were always capable of being. And to do this work, you don't need a therapist's couch or a mountain retreat, though both can help. What you need is a map, because your subconscious isn't just a storage room, it's a theater, and inside that theater live characters, not imaginary ones. Deep, recurring patterns of energy that show up across every human life, in every culture, in every century, wearing different clothes but carrying the same essential role. Some call them archetypes. You can call them whatever you like. What matters is that they are already living inside you right now, shaping how you think, how you love, how you react when life gets difficult. Most people let these characters run the show unconsciously. Today we are going to meet 5 of them by name, look them directly in the eye, and decide consciously, deliberately, how they get to work for you instead of against you. This is not about becoming someone else. It is about finally becoming fully yourself, with nothing hidden and nothing wasted. Consider for a moment how much of your daily life runs on autopilot. The route you drive without noticing the road. The response you give before someone has even finished their sentence. The way you brace for disappointment before you even know what's coming. None of that is conscious choice. It is old programming, written a long time ago, by a younger version of you who was simply trying to stay safe, trying to be loved, trying to make sense of a confusing world, with whatever tools were available at the time. That younger self did the best it could with what it had. But you are not that self anymore, even though parts of your mind still operate as if you are. Recycling your subconscious means going back into that old programming, not to criticize the person who wrote it, but to lovingly update it with everything you have learned since. So take a breath. Whatever chapter of life you are standing in right now, whether you feel strong or exhausted, whether you feel like you're winning or barely holding on, none of that disqualifies you from this moment. In fact, it qualifies you completely. Every person who has ever transformed their life started exactly where you are standing now, aware that something needed to change, and willing to look inward long enough to find out what. Let's begin with the character most people spend their whole lives running from. We'll call this one the keeper of the wound. This is the part of you that holds every unhealed moment. The harsh words that lodged themselves in your chest as a child, the time you were left out, the relationship that ended and left you questioning your own worth, the mistake you made that you still replay at 3 in the morning. Most people treat this character like an enemy. They lock the door, throw away the key, and spend enormous amounts of energy making sure that room never opens. But here is what nobody tells you. A locked door doesn't make the room disappear. It just means you stop choosing what happens in there. And unattended pain does not stay quiet. It leaks. It shows up in the way you flinch at criticism you weren't even given. It shows up in the relationships you sabotage right before they get too close. It shows up in the goals you almost reach and then quietly abandon. Because some old, unspoken part of you doesn't yet believe you're allowed to have them. The work here is not to relive every painful memory in vivid detail. It is not to blame anyone, including yourself. The work is far simpler and far more powerful. It is to finally acknowledge what happened, without flinching away and without exaggerating it either. To say calmly and honestly, this happened to me, this is how it shaped me, and it does not have to shape what comes next. That single act, naming the wound instead of hiding from it, begins the recycling process immediately. The pain that is witnessed starts to lose its grip. Pain that stays hidden only grows roots. You are not weak for having been hurt. You are human. And the strongest people you have ever admired are not the ones who were never wounded. They are the ones who stopped pretending they weren't, and used that honesty as fuel instead of letting it become a cage. Imagine for a moment carrying a heavy bag on your back for years, without ever setting it down, without ever even checking what's inside. You'd grow used to the weight. You'd start to think it was simply part of your body, part of your identity, something you were built to carry forever. And then one day you set it down, just to look, and you realize how much lighter you feel with it off your shoulders, even before you've decided what to do with what's inside. That is what it feels like the first time you consciously acknowledge an old wound instead of stepping around it for the 1000th time. Relief arrives before resolution does. That is how you know you're on the right path. This is not about becoming fragile or endlessly focused on the past. It is the opposite. The people who refuse to look at their wounds are the ones who stay controlled by them, reacting instead of choosing, defending instead of building. The people who face their wounds honestly are the ones who finally get to set them down and walk forward unburdened. So if there is a memory that still stings when it surfaces, don't push it away today. Let it be seen, let it be understood, and then, gently, let it become something you survived rather than something that defines you. There is also something worth saying clearly here, because so many people get this part wrong. Acknowledging your wound is not the same thing as living inside it forever. There is a difference between visiting a room to understand what's in it, and moving your entire life into that room and locking the door behind you. Some people, once they finally start looking at their pain, become so consumed by it that it becomes a new kind of identity. A story they tell so often it hardens into a cage of its own. That is not the goal here. The goal is understanding, not permanent residence. You are allowed to look directly at what hurt you, learn everything it has to teach you, and then walk back out of that room and close the door gently behind you, carrying only the lesson and leaving the weight behind. Healing was never about staying wounded longer. It was always about finally being willing to look, so that you could finally be free to leave. Now let's meet the second character, one that lives in every person who has ever felt restless, curious, or hungry for something more than the life they currently have. We'll call this one the wanderer. This is the part of you that gets quietly bored with routine, that feels a pull toward the unknown even when the known feels safe and comfortable. Most people silence this voice too, because exploration feels risky, uncertainty feels uncomfortable, and staying where you are always feels easier in the short term. But the wanderer inside you is not trying to destabilize your life. It is trying to expand it. It is the part of you responsible for every meaningful growth you have ever experienced. Every new skill you learned, every place you traveled to that changed your perspective, every relationship you took a chance on that turned out to matter. The wanderer thrives on one thing: willingness. Willingness to not have all the answers before taking the first step. Willingness to feel a little lost, because feeling lost is often the exact sensation that precedes discovering something you didn't know you needed. Think about every time in your life you've grown the most. It probably wasn't during a comfortable, predictable stretch of time. It was likely during a season when everything felt unfamiliar: a new city, a new job, a new relationship, a new version of yourself you hadn't tried on yet. Growth and comfort rarely occupy the same room. If you want to keep growing, you have to be willing to let the wanderer lead sometimes, even when logic whispers that staying still would be easier. This doesn't mean recklessness. It doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or chasing every impulse that crosses your mind. The wanderer, when balanced, is not chaotic. It is curious. It asks good questions instead of accepting old answers just because they're familiar. It asks, is this belief actually true, or did I just inherit it from someone else's fear? Is this the life I chose, or the life I settled into because it was available? Is this the ceiling of what's possible for me, or just the edge of what I've dared to try so far? These questions can feel uncomfortable because they threaten the illusion of certainty. But certainty was never the same thing as truth. Certainty is often just familiarity wearing a disguise. If you have been feeling that quiet, persistent itch lately, a sense that something in your life needs to shift, even if you can't yet explain what, that is not a malfunction. That is the wanderer, doing exactly what it was built to do. It is not trying to ruin your stability. It is trying to stop you from mistaking stagnation for peace. Real peace does not need to numb your curiosity to survive. Real peace can hold both roots and movement at the same time. So the next time that restless feeling rises in you, don't immediately silence it with distraction. Ask it what it's really pointing toward. Somewhere inside that unrest is usually a very specific, very honest answer, waiting for you to finally take it seriously. There is a particular kind of fear that shows up whenever the wanderer starts speaking loudly, and it is worth naming directly, because so many people mistake it for a warning sign rather than what it actually is. It is the fear of losing what you've already built in exchange for something uncertain. This fear will tell you that stability and growth cannot coexist, that choosing one means abandoning the other. But look closely at anyone you admire who built a genuinely meaningful life, and you will almost always find a moment where they had to tolerate uncertainty in order to reach something better than what they already had. They did not have guarantees. They had willingness. Stability that never grows isn't really stability at all. It is just a slower kind of stagnation, dressed up in comfortable language. True stability is not the absence of change. It is the presence of enough inner steadiness to move through change without losing yourself. That kind of steadiness is built exactly the same way muscle is built. Through repeated, voluntary exposure to something slightly uncomfortable, followed by rest, followed by trying again. Now we arrive at the third character, one that will determine whether everything we've discussed so far actually turns into change, or simply stays as a nice idea you agreed with for a few minutes and then forgot. We'll call this one the warrior. This is the part of you responsible for discipline, for follow-through, for doing the difficult thing on the days when motivation refuses to show up. Understanding your wounds and hearing your curiosity are essential first steps, but without the warrior, they remain permanently theoretical. Awareness without action is simply a more articulate form of standing still. The warrior is often misunderstood as aggression, but true inner strength has almost nothing to do with anger and almost everything to do with consistency. The warrior is the version of you that gets up on the morning you don't feel like it, the version of you that says no to something comfortable because you already said yes to something meaningful, the version of you that protects your time, your energy, and your values, even when doing so is unpopular or inconvenient. This character isn't loud. It doesn't need an audience. It shows up in the small, unglamorous decisions nobody else will ever see. The extra effort when you could have coasted, the honest conversation you didn't avoid, the boundary you held, even though it was easier to let it slide. Most people wait for confidence before they act. They think once I feel ready, once I feel strong enough, once the fear goes away, then I'll do the hard thing. But that order is backwards, and it is precisely why so many people wait their entire lives for a feeling that never fully arrives. The truth is far more empowering. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is action taken alongside it. The warrior does not wait for fear to leave the room. The warrior simply refuses to let fear be the one holding the door. Every single person you have ever respected for their strength did not eliminate their doubts before moving forward. They moved forward with their doubts quietly walking beside them, refusing to let those doubts drive. This is where recycling truly becomes visible in daily life, because the same fear that once made you shrink can be reshaped into fuel that makes you sharper. The same anger that once made you reactive can be reshaped into the clarity that helps you finally set a boundary you've needed for years. Nothing about your difficult emotions needs to be wasted. They were never proof that something is wrong with you. They are simply energy, and energy can always be redirected. The warrior's job is not to eliminate emotion. It is to make sure emotion serves your direction instead of hijacking it. If your life feels stuck right now, ask yourself honestly, is it because you don't know what to do? Or because you know exactly what to do and have been waiting for a feeling of readiness that keeps getting postponed? Most people already know their next right step. What they're missing isn't clarity. It's the willingness to act before they feel completely certain. That willingness is available to you right now, in this exact moment, regardless of how uncertain you feel. It doesn't require permission. It only requires a decision. It is worth being honest about something here too, because false motivation rarely lasts. Discipline built through the warrior is not always dramatic, and it is almost never glamorous. It looks like closing your laptop at a reasonable hour, so tomorrow doesn't start already depleted. It looks like finishing the task you told yourself you'd finish, even though no one would notice if you didn't. It looks like apologizing first, even when part of you still feels justified. These moments rarely make it into anyone's highlight reel, and that is exactly why so few people commit to them consistently. But small, repeated integrity with yourself is the foundation every larger achievement eventually gets built on top of. You cannot borrow someone else's discipline. You cannot inherit someone else's follow-through. You can only build your own, one honored commitment at a time, until trusting yourself becomes a habit instead of a hope. Now let's turn to the fourth character, the one responsible for making sure all this effort doesn't burn you out or lead you somewhere hollow. We'll call this one the sage. This is the wise, patient part of you that steps back, reflects, and asks whether the direction you're moving in actually aligns with who you are becoming, not just who you used to be or who others expect you to be. The wanderer explores, the warrior acts. But without the sage, exploration becomes scattered and action becomes exhausting, because neither one pauses long enough to ask whether the path still makes sense. The sage is built through reflection, not through the accumulation of more information. You do not need to read another 100 books to access this part of yourself. You need moments of quiet, honest self-examination, walking without your phone, sitting with a difficult feeling instead of numbing it, journaling not to perform insight but to actually discover it. In a world that constantly demands your attention outward, the sage asks you to occasionally turn that same attention inward and to trust what you find there. Most people are so busy consuming other people's opinions that they never develop enough silence to hear their own. One of the most valuable gifts the sage offers is perspective on time. When you are in pain, time feels infinite, and the difficulty feels permanent. When you are afraid, the worst outcome feels inevitable. The sage is the voice that gently reminds you. This feeling, however intense, is not the whole story. You have survived every difficult chapter that came before this one, even the ones you once believed you wouldn't survive. That track record is not an accident. It is evidence. The sage doesn't offer false comfort or empty positivity. It offers grounded, earned perspective, built from everything you've already lived through. The sage also teaches you the difference between reacting and responding. A reaction is immediate, emotional, and often driven by old patterns from the keeper of the wound. A response is considered, intentional, and shaped by present awareness rather than past pain. The gap between those two things is where your growth actually lives. It is a small gap, sometimes only a breath long, but learning to find it changes everything. The sage is the one who teaches you to pause in that gap on purpose, instead of stumbling through it unconsciously, the way you may have done for years. If you find yourself constantly overwhelmed, constantly reactive, constantly feeling like life is happening to you rather than with you, it may be because this part of you has been neglected. Not gone, never gone, just quiet, waiting for you to make space for it again. You access it not through force, but through stillness. Even 5 honest minutes a day of sitting with your own thoughts, without judgment and without distraction, begins to strengthen this inner voice. Over time, it becomes louder than the noise around you, and that is when your decisions start to feel like they're truly your own again. The sage also holds something the other characters cannot offer on their own. Forgiveness both for